Here we are. Now we're live.
Cool.
All right. So we have Joel Pearson on today. How are you doing, Joel?
All right. Finally managed to get through all the technical issues and we're on.
Yeah, finally. I've been wanting to get you back on for a while. But Doomver, you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Let me get
Can you hear me?
adjusted with it a little bit. All right. So the topics today are losing my religion and what in the mental health is going on. And with the losing my religion aspect, I was going to ask you, Joel. I think me and Denny have talked about things a bit of our background in religion, but we'll let you go with yours first.
Well, I've done a couple of videos on my background in great detail before, but I was a missionary kid and raised sort of in a very small group of missionaries who were all believers. So I wasn't really introduced to, I didn't really know anyone very well who wasn't a believer. So just growing up out in Africa until I was 16, I think, and then came back to England. And because I was so thoroughly indoctrinated from such an early age, it wasn't until I was 31 that I was able to sort of break through the last of the chains. You gradually learn things as you go through life and pick up stuff that you thought was true, and then it turned out it wasn't. So things like the Earth being 6,000 years old, which was taught to me in school because I went to a faith school. It wasn't until I read Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene, that I realized that the Earth is so much older.
And was Ken Ham popular there too?
There were chick tracts, I recall.
Yeah.
Made it all the way over there, huh?
Yeah, there was. We had American teachers in a school in Cameroon.
You were in Cameroon.
Yeah, I was in Chad, Cameroon. Spent a bit of time in a few other countries, but it was mostly Chad and Cameroon.
Is that near Ethiopia?
It's Central Africa, whereas Ethiopia is Eastern Africa. But yeah, a few countries over.
I was just wondering just how, like, geologically that area is just insane with fossils and animals and just all kinds of evidence to the contrary of a young Earth over there.
Well, England is really good for fossils. It's one of the reasons that paleontology largely started in England. But when I was in Chad, that was the Sahara Desert. So, yeah, you don't really see any fossils there.
Yeah.
And in Cameroon, it's a rainforest. So things get washed away so quickly, you don't really see fossils. It's all mud and soil.
Right. Yeah, I'm unfamiliar with a lot of the different places in Africa, but I would love to go over there at some point in my life.
That's a huge place.
Were there a lot of missionary families like in the same area? Did you have competing missionaries in that area? That's just a hilarious thought to me. But
yeah, there were different charities. They generally sort of worked with each other. We were with Wycliffe Bible Translators, which was quite a large one. And a lot of it was writing down languages and translating languages. So you had to do things like add education, so teach the population to read and write in their own language, because a lot of the countries in Africa were obviously colonial powers. So they were taken over and taught, you have to speak English or German or French, which is not their native languages. There's something like 2,000 languages in Africa. So yeah, most people have to speak multiple languages because there'll be like the Arabic trade language, and then there'll be the colonial language which the government use, and then there will be hundreds of different dialects of other languages as well.
It's really interesting. Like, as an American, where we learn our language and that's it. Maybe a little bit of Spanish in high school or something, but it's crazy to think of a continent with that many languages and that many I don't even know, like tribes and cultures and you name it, traditions, whatever.
There's an island. Is it Guinea or New Guinea? I always forget which Guinea it is. But just off the coast of Australia, there's an island with over 1,000 languages just on this tiny little island. It's mentioned by Jared Diamond in Guns, Germs, and Steel, which is a really interesting book about the history of mankind.
I've heard of that book.
Yeah, it won a Pulitzer Prize for a good reason.
Mm.
So, what brought you out of all of that? Was it just common sense?
Common sense is a dangerous thing because you can common sense yourself into believing the Earth is flat. You need better epistemology, really. So there was a whole load of different factors. But yeah, curiosity, I would say, was the key. I started wondering whether my beliefs were actually true. And one big question on that actually was I was in a car drive with my manager at the time, who just innocently asked me the question, other than the people, what do you get out of church? And I couldn't answer that question because when I thought about it, everything I got out of church was the people. There's nothing left once you take away the relationships and the support that you get from the other people there, and like the atmosphere that you get from being with others. You take all that away, and there's no actual God left in there. There's just the people. So that led me to ask questions. But it wasn't until I read The Selfish Gene that things started really falling apart in terms of religion. Just because Dawkins is so eloquent and just knows how to put his point across with such clarity that I couldn't deny it anymore. And once you start questioning one pillar of authority, so like, my teachers and parents and everyone had told me one way of things, I started to think, well, if I can't trust this authority, where do I go? And then I started reading science books and philosophy books and, every sort of discipline of expertise, trying to learn archaeology and philosophy. And reading all of those books just reshaped my world, basically, piece by piece. It's a bit of a blur of about 2 or 3 months of just intense studying as I try to rebuild my entire worldview.
I don't know if you like to talk about this or not, but like the autism aspect, are you okay with talking about all of that? Or
yeah, sure. I had a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome because a friend of mine mentioned to me he had a degree in psychology and he's got Asperger's, and he said, you have all of the traits of Asperger's. You should probably see a doctor about that. So yeah, I went to a doctor, finally persuaded him to refer me to an expert, and they gave me a diagnosis of Asperger's. So people with Asperger's or autism in general are particularly vulnerable to religious indoctrination through the love bombing method, because people with autism are usually really bad at seeing through other people's motives. Like, they can't read people, and they'll often assume the best of someone else. Just because, so people with autism are usually really honest. They assume other people are also really honest. So it's quite easy to sort of take them and trap them. But in the same sense, I mean, I was raised from the beginning in the cult, so I didn't really have a choice. And I call religion a cult, or Christianity a cult, in the sense of, the historical sense that all religions are cults. It's just a system of veneration and worship, and, religion is a general thing.
I think it just oozes cult to begin with the whole idea of, like, when you're saying about the church family, if that's all there is holding you into it, really, whenever you start stripping things away. And it was purpose. That there's not necessarily they're purposely doing it, but that is a strong manipulative thing to be doing to somebody, to tell you that this is your family and that you have to respect them and be learn from them, and they're the only ones. It separates you from the other crowds and other viewpoints that you'd be able to take in.
Yeah, so there would be a natural separation in that if you're a child, growing up in any society, you tend to be sort of protected from the outside world. And then as a foreigner as well, obviously kidnapping is the thing. So we tended to have guarded compounds, and the kids would be kept in sight at all times. Language barriers, and being a white kid in a country that's mostly black people, that kind of thing. That it all adds up and stacks on top of each other. And Christianity, right from the beginning, in Paul's letters, he uses fictive kinship terms. So it's very much all about simulating a family and replacing a family. Even the words of Jesus in various Gospels are quite divisive in terms of saying you curse your own family and follow the cult. That's basically what he says.
Do you have something to say, Doomver?
Yeah, I was
I gotta
just.
cook it.
I'll
I'll be right back.
Okay. I was just curious, Joel, about how you said that the Asperger's would make some people vulnerable to just taking people at their word. Do you currently ever find yourself having that problem, or?
Potentially. So it's something where everyone has certain traits and quirks that you can overcome using your method. So if you naturally have an inclination towards trusting people, and you're aware of that, then you can constantly remind yourself, to stay above it.
Right.
But it's something where if you're tired, then you'll get a bit more relaxed, and you may not have your defenses up as such. So, for example, I know if I went to, say, a cult compound or something like that, and I was left only in that environment, I could well go back to being religious just by the emotional pressure and like the overriding of your logical brain.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that I suspect I'm highly suggestible, so I try and avoid situations where someone could emotionally manipulate me.
Right. Your self-awareness seems to help a lot. Like myself, I've been diagnosed with basically it's a cocktail of diagnoses, I guess you would say. But mine was more violent outbursts towards people and things. And I found methods myself to be able to take a step back and control my rage or whatever issues it would be. So I kind of get what you're saying.
You avoid triggers, you avoid situations, you try and de-escalate before you hit a critical point, that kind of thing.
Right. I try to diminish the importance of the situation. Something that's not important is not worth me doing harm to someone or myself or whatever.
Yeah, I found that actually early in life, what I used to do was try and think ahead to potential situations, and then think if my mental faculties were compromised in this situation, I need to decide now what I would do in that situation. And then if I find myself in a heated situation, I can think back to what was my plan for this time and try and act knowing that that was a better decision-making point in my life.
Right.
It's quite difficult to do because you can't predict everything, but you can think of general circumstances.
Yeah, like I found myself in my employment. I was a bouncer at nightclubs, so I would have to be violent to people sometimes. I would have to fight people for my job, and it was definitely strange. I ended up getting out of that because it wasn't a healthy thing for me, but I was good at it. Like I could hold my own, but it was really unhealthy mentally for me to encourage that behavior at certain points and then have to have a disconnect and not apply that type of behavior in my regular life.
Yeah, in the same sense as like professional boxers and fighters, they have a set of reflexes that they have to be able to switch on and off, don't they? Because you could potentially be charged as having a deadly weapon if you know how to fight, that kind of thing. I think that was the plot of Con Air.
Yeah. Well, I was in the military too. Like I was trained for that type of thing. So
yeah, it's one thing to try and subdue and just take care of a customer, basically, in the sense of trying to get them out of an establishment, and another thing to kill on command, because it's very different worlds, isn't it?
Right.
I think we're already segueing over what I was going to talk about, anyways. But what made me think of this topic for mental health and the environments that contribute to those things? It's just the people that keep wanting to say that only you can control your own actions and things. Where I kind of agree with that to a certain degree, and your feelings and emotions, how they want to try to kind of place that all on you so neatly, and I don't know about that.
Well,
Like if you start breaking
like
down
Joel was saying, if you pull yourself away, if you have enough forethought to pull yourself away from them situations before you get yourself into them.
I'm not even talking
not
about
everybody
that.
has that. Oh,
I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about how
Okay.
your environment, even that you're raised in and everything, what's in the water, what's in the air, what's in the everything, to where if there's lead in your water because you've been growing up in an area that's poor and the community doesn't have enough money to actually replace those water lines and things, you're going to end up with side effects from that. And there are mental side effects from that affect you, that affect your brain, that you're not really responsible for in any way, but that does affect your emotions. It affects your feelings, and it affects the way that you're seeing and perceiving things by the way that it's interacting with your brain.
There was a case of a sniper, wasn't there? There was a guy who kept asking for help from medical professionals. I think he tried to turn himself into the police, and he ended up going on a killing spree, didn't he? There's a guy, and they found like a massive tumor in his brain. I forget who it was.
Yeah, Whitman from Texas A&M, the Texas A&M shooter.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, the environment of growing up, if you have narcissistic parents or something like that as well, that kind of toxic environment is going to influence the way you perceive everything afterwards, and even after you're grown up and on your own trying to do things, then I don't know. Me and my brother, we've both gone through mental illness from things like that, as well as I'm not sure what part you went into. We have a nice little web of things to choose from in that category. But
yeah, at least narcissism is being increasingly recognized, I think. It's something that's in recent years become more of a common word, like people understand the concept. I mean, obviously you've got the original tale of Narcissus, but this is something where now that it's a more recognized personality disorder, and people, I think in general, are becoming more aware of mental health. I've heard like conservatives will complain, now everyone's got a disorder, but it's just they always existed. They just weren't recognized so much.
Right. Yeah, that's we've got a lot of that type of conspiracy thing going on around here. With I've even heard people try to attribute things in the water contributing to autism and things, which, I mean, I don't know with the lead case. I don't know if that leads to that or not. That could be a possibility, but I'm sure that's not what they're talking about.
So I think the causes of autism are not fully understood yet. I mean, there are potential links to gut bacteria. There's hereditary links as well. Things like identical twin studies and looking at parents and children. But I think it's something that's not fully understood yet.
But it amazes me, those people, those same people that are paranoid over the water and stuff and that aspect of things, well, they don't want their taxes raised to be able to replace those lines or to do anything to actually improve the situation.
Well, in the case of water, is that government owned or is that a private company?
That's usually depending on the area. Like it'll be a locally type local government.
I recently watched Aaron Brockovich interviewed by Jim Jeffries, which is quite interesting.
But it could be done in several ways. The state could provide funding to just try to replace all lines in all areas for the betterment of. They can pass the legislation however they want on whatever level they want. They just choose not to.
Yeah, it seems to have something to do with the amount of influence that companies have on American politics.
Right.
And I never understood the concept of trying to deregulate companies, because we know that companies will always try and look after their shareholders and try and make more money, so they can cut corners, like what we saw at the Texas power cuts.
Yeah, the whole idea of free market economy just baffles me. That some people that are on board with socialism on one aspect of things, like the libertarians, they pretty well do that to where they jump back and forth on certain things, and that's one of them, where they think that free market economics is going to solve everything.
Well,
And
they
it's like,
love the sound of the free market and freedom and all that stuff, and then when it takes hold and does a thing in front of them, they're like,
yeah,
"Well, what was that? That's not what I wanted." Well, no, that's what you wanted. Like, that's when they say, like, that Dr. Seuss got canceled or whatever. Like, no, that's the marketplace
yeah,
removing their own books.
yeah, and we are
Like, that
we're
wasn't people doing
pretty,
that.
yeah, we're leaning pretty close to that area already. And then, like, the only real, like, I don't know, the only, like, government setup that bases itself around that free market economy, the most well-known one would be China. So they're already, like, on one end they want to trash talk communism, then on the other end they want to support aspects of it that are that's about the only way that it looks like that would work, is if the government was fully in control of those things.
I wouldn't call China communist, really, but maybe
Oh,
pseudo-communist.
They're like
I mean,
totalitarian almost, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
they
the world
ha-
has never seen true communism.
I mean, they have parties, but if you just keep the Communist Party in, and the leader says that they're going to be the only leader, I don't know where how much of a line are we going to draw there with that?
Yeah, that one guy at Tiananmen Square, I think, showed the world what's going on really in China.
Yeah. What do you care to elaborate on that a little bit?
The guy who just had his shopping, he was coming home with his food and decided to block a column of tanks. It's a world famous incident.
Yeah, like it was back in the 60s or.
Yeah, China hasn't really improved since then.
Yeah.
What they've done is they've gotten a lot better at using technology to monitor their citizens.
Well, Hong Kong was ready to overthrow some stuff, and then Corona hit and kind of stopped everything. Like Hong Kong, they were like on the rooftops with bows and arrows and flaming Molotov cocktails and shit.
Yeah, Hong Kong has an interesting history. Going back to the Opium Wars, I think.
Right.
Man, it sounds like rednecks here.
Oh, there's opiate wars here.
Yeah.
A bunch of Jedi opioid Kenobis.
I think there's a significant difference in that there's not a global superpower trying to enforce opiates on the citizens.
Right, absolutely. But back to the autism thing. What I was gonna say before we ventured off was, it seems like until we know more about the problems, or not problem, the mental issue. I don't want to make it sound negative. Until we know more, we will use umbrella terms like autism or you name it, PTSD. They like to do that. Like, I think if they would actually spend more time and effort digging into the spectrum of problems that people have mentally, there would be even more diagnoses. There would be even more names for things.
Yeah, and people resist diagnosis quite a lot, and it can be quite hard as well. If you're going to a doctor who was educated under an older curriculum, they may well not be aware of the advances in research done. So I know doctors have to keep taking exams and keep updating their knowledge, but there's quite a lot of back memory stuff that's obsolete. And everyone carries this. They just remember the stuff they learned at school and don't necessarily update that knowledge. So it's not just doctors. But yeah, there's a lot of ignorance out there, and that's just inevitable when you're dealing with people, because there's only so much you can hold in your brain. So yeah, there's a massive undiagnosis. Like the vast majority of mental illnesses, I would say, have not been diagnosed. And especially just if you look at other cultures as well, not just like the US, but around the world, any place where they still believe in demonic possession and witches, then obviously there's a massive amount of undiagnosed illnesses behind that.
That's definitely a thing over here.
Yeah, something like over 50% of Americans believe in angels, I think.
I mean, like when people start talking to themselves and think that somebody else is there, and they're hearing voices and think that
I was listening to a podcast today where this family's daughter had gotten murdered, but beforehand she had been molested by a family member, and whenever they were asked, the mother and father, when they were asked what they did, they said they prayed that for God to take those memories out of her brain. And I was thinking, holy shit, like that was your solution.
Yeah, that sounds like something they should go to prison for, to be honest.
I mean, just as negligence.
Yeah, that's aiding and abetting, or whatever that term is.
Religion.
Yeah, it was.
Religion has a way of skirting around all those petty details,
We have religious policies in our laws that if you have the sincerely held religious belief that you prayed super duper hard, and your daughter still got murdered, or like whatever, like that's the world we live in now.
Yeah, I read that there are some states with laws where they're allowed to kill their children as long as it's for faith-based reasons, like denying them medical care and praying for them. And there's still child marriage as well, based on religious reasons. I mean, the age for getting married is ridiculous.
Are you familiar with the Amish communities?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a few documentaries on them, so not super familiar.
So there's very little documentation of them. Like, I don't believe they have social security numbers, or, you know what I mean? Like, as far as their existence in our government records. So, I mean, they would be prime for trafficking and underage pedophilia, whatever, incest, all those things. Like, it's rampant in those communities.
Because in Utah as well, the Mormon polygamous groups.
Right.
Very similar, undocumented children who could just disappear.
Well, like the Amish don't even have internet access or phones or running water. Like,
I mean, the Church of God, or the Children of God cult, that was, I had Aaron Ferguson on, talked about that on the other podcast that I had. It was so interesting to hear him speak on man, a lot of the same groups and stuff that our church was into too, like Joel Osteen. Like, they all just kind of go together, blend together so well.
I think human psychology is about the same, isn't it? So everyone is susceptible to the same manipulation tactics. And it's something that Darren Brown said when he picks an audience member at random. He genuinely is picking them at random. He said the point is it works on everyone. No one is immune to these tricks.
Right.
Yeah. There's a lot of cold reading in that megachurch community, like in the faith healers and stuff, to try to. And also, as far as like if they just see you acting like down in the dumps a little bit, they try to act like God told them that, oh, you know, Doomver's having a bad day today. You know, like I'm going to go talk to him and get him in the spirit. You know, like they use it in their grift.
Well, they can use it one way or the other. It doesn't matter if they get a negative response back, because then they can use that as well. That person's sinful and they need prayed for. Then we can just do more. And it reinforces their own faith of thinking that they're better in a way or whatever, or on this higher level, that they need to be just trying to, well, they need to be better in their faith to be able to indoctrinate these people better than what they're doing, apparently. So
Yeah, so the way... I'm sorry, you go ahead.
I was just going to say that most of them, well, that's just speculation, but I would think that most of them don't even understand what they're doing is indoctrination. They think they are telling people real information.
Yeah, so because gods aren't real, they're taught, when they say things out loud that they believe are from gods, and they get encouraged in doing that, they think they're on the right track, but what they're doing is just voicing their own intuitions.
Right.
So imagine if the whole church waited for a message from God and they waited for an actual message from God. Nobody would say anything. They go, oh, the end. So they're forced to use their own intuitions.
I mean, yeah. That's spot on.
I think a big problem, getting back to what we were talking about earlier, you were saying how narcissism's used more now, or you hear it more, and that's kind of a double-edged sword on its own, that it gets used more, but it gets used more incorrectly. Yeah. So you've got this thing of people aren't educated enough to know what contributes to the mental illness itself. Like, and this even goes to like things like spanking or yelling and never questioning authority, shame, guilt, all of those things that contribute pretty heavily to how the child develops later on. Well, and it's never even put any thought into.
There's also the malignant narcissism and the other variant. So, like, even just saying narcissism, you're just scratching the surface, and you got to dig down into which one.
Yeah, that book that I was reading, the Children of the Self-Absorbed, it goes into the different types of narcissism and how it displays itself in the parents, from the parents' perspective and the child's perspective. So a lot of those same things that the parent displays later on, the child could end up repeating that same behavior.
Well, I was thinking like the same with schizophrenia. Like, what about children raised with schizophrenic parents, or you name the illness, and a child raised by that particular parent having that illness, how does that affect that child?
It would definitely have its own behavioral issues that they'd be displaying, I guess.
It would be its own little cocktail of chemical imbalances and bad teachings and bad decisions,
Well, so the concept of mental illness affecting children's behaviors or your environment in general, like you were saying, lead in the water, that's basically the free will versus determinism debate. But what is the alternative to determinism? I mean, if you don't think that the environment can affect people's actions, then why do we punish anyone for doing anything bad? I've never understood the difference between free will and determinism, because to me they're indistinguishable from each other.
Yeah, I personally don't believe in free will. I don't think.
Well, so how would you tell the difference between free will and determinism on a given action? How would you be able to define the two, and then how would you be able to tell which one was which?
Yeah, I'm thinking right now, and I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's ultimately the answer. Everyone tries to debate the subject, they can never actually make it falsifiable. So it's just a nonsense discussion.
Yeah, I don't know that there's free will at all. Like that, like I said, it seems like the luck, just the luck of the draw. You either get your parents are either wealthy or they aren't, and that affects so much. Like I said, it affects where you end up growing up at and everything, and those things have their own effects on you, even to the point of what kind of job you're going to be able to get. Because
nutrition, I think that studies have shown that childhood nutrition makes a significant impact on like brain function and capabilities in higher learning.
Development. Just on brain development, even like as the mom eats while the baby's inside her.
And in this area in particular, there's radon exposure and things like that contribute heavily to it. Can cause mental illness and things later on.
Lead exposure is supposed to be generational also.
Poor families can't really afford to get the necessary things done to their house or whatever to be able to get to be safe from all of that. But the wealthy can. They have no problem with any of that. They'll build a new house. They'll build, the one coal baron here had water piped in from over across the next town over whenever he contaminated all of the well water around with dumping toxic waste and things into the streams for years. So like that's the kind of just basic feudalism we still have here, only labeled as this freedom, and it takes away a lot of choices that you'd have. So what are you left with? Like if all of those choices are taken away and you're left with a pile of shit choices.
I mean, we're left with poor education, right. Poor nutrition, poor health care. It's that's what it is. And they've figured out by using racism how to turn the poor black people and the poor white people against each other, and the poor Mexican people and the poor, you name the whatever, because I don't really even believe in races at this point in my life. Like, we're all humans. It doesn't matter what pigment's in our skin. Like, it's the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah, there was, I think the last video in Aaron Ra's systematic classification of life covered races. And he was pointing out that races used to mean a species thing. And of course, there aren't really any races in humanity. We're all so closely related to each other. We're all basically the same race.
Yeah, that's good. That enforces what I thought.
Yeah, I think there was a statistic which was if you take two chimpanzees from different parts of the same forest and you compare how similar they are genetically, they will be more different from each other than any two humans from any part of the world. So humans are just incredibly homogenized as a species, because we have a genetic bottleneck where our population went down to about 10,000 people around 70,000 years ago. So we're practically inbred. Like, the human race is incredibly non-diverse.
Until if we speciate again. Like,
seems unlikely given the globalization. In order to get speciation, you generally require some sort of isolation of populations, like an island effect. So let's say humans moved to Mars, and then Mars and Earth lost contact with each other, and there wasn't enough traffic between the two. You might get speciation in that event.
Now there was
like overpopulation drive that.
It's just genetic drift in different directions, different selection pressures. So eventually your genes drift far apart from each other that you are no longer consistently able to interbreed. So like with lions and tigers, sometimes they can interbreed, sometimes they can't. It's, once your probability of fertilization drops below, say, 50%, you could say they're separate species, but it's a very fuzzy gray area because it takes so long to happen.
do you think that's happened with Homo sapiens and Neanderthals and things like that, like already? Because I know there's been evidence of that.
That's what I was kind of getting at.
Yeah, so Neanderthals are a different species in the sense that their DNA is significantly different from sapiens. And of course, they're extinct, so we can't really take them to compare. But we do have some Neanderthal DNA. And there was interbreeding between sapiens and Neanderthalensis. But yeah, we consider them a different species. The thing is, we're using morphology there and these significant differences in genetics, but it's blurry lines. That is, if you can interbreed with them, are they really a different species? You just have to step back, take a big view, and go roughly there. We'll cut that, because if you put all of the generations next to each other, there would be a continuous line of relationship. So there's never a point where you can just divide the two and go, those are now separate species.
That's kind of like how if you line up all the skulls of primates, like you can't get the creationists to agree where the monkeys stop and the humans start.
Yeah, and they'll identify different ones. I think that was actually done as an experiment, and the same creationist, I think, identified the same skull as human and ape separately.
Right.
Like they see it on different occasions, they give it a different classification because, of course, humans are apes. It's like saying, look at this Dachshund skull and tell me if it's a dog or not. You know, it's a part of the categorization of a Dachshund that it is a dog.
Well, I'd had somebody ask me, because they were reading something about evolution. It was just a very quick article or something, and it said how we evolved from fish. And so he kept trying to, we just came from, we're all fish then. Well, yeah, if you want to look at it that way, then yes. Like, yeah, you can't outgrow your ancestry on that, you know.
Your inner fish, yeah.
Yeah. So
there's a book called Your Inner Fish by Neil Shubin. Neil Shubin. It's a really good book. Have you, Joel? Have you read that book?
I haven't. It is on my list to read. I was thinking. So I know that book. I know the title, which is why I referenced it. But there's a book by Richard Dawkins called "The Magic of Reality," and I believe it's in that book where he takes the concept of a photograph of your father and his father and his father, and you lie that stack of photographs down, and you go back 185 million generations. You pull that picture out, it's a fish.
Yeah. Was that the children's book?
Yeah. It's a great book. The illustrated one is really good.
I bought that for my son and gave it to a friend for their son.
It's a brilliant way of melding science with myth, because of course it tells you like 2 or 3 different myths from different cultures, and then tells you the scientific truth. And it's a fantastic way of saying, we tried this, they all failed. Here's the real answer. But you can see what they were getting at.
And by calling it a children's book's an understatement. Like it's a really good book. Like it was a good introduction for anybody that doesn't have a good versing in stuff like that.
It's really good. I have 3 copies of that. I've got the audio book, I've got the paperback version, and I've got the full illustrated hardcover as well. So I highly recommend that.
I got the hardcover. What do you think? I mean, just since we're on the subject of Dawkins, like, what do you think about his recent fiascos he's going through here?
Oh, didn't he say something transphobic?
Yeah, he's been spouting off a little bit transphobia.
Yeah, I don't really know what to make of public intellectuals doing stuff like that. J.K. Rowling was doing some transphobic stuff recently as well.
Right. They were both actually agreeing with each other.
Yeah, so you can see the point where being genetically, like biologically male or female, fair enough. But anyone who has read the up-to-date science on this knows that the brain may not be the same gender as the sex of the body. And this is just something that we've seen with the way hormones work. I think the various studies were referenced by Robert Sapolsky in Behave, where he points out that you can have a brain which is filled with estrogen, while the rest of the body is being filled with testosterone. And if you do brain scans, the pattern of the brain activity looks female, while the body is male, and vice versa, of course. You can see this happening, where you can actually look at the brain scan without looking at the body, and you can correctly identify the gender the person identifies as.
I've seen, I mean, this isn't the same as what you're talking about, but I've seen in animals, like I've seen photos of birds that are like split down the middle, like female plumage on one side and male plumage on the other side.
That sounds like a chimera. So you know where two embryos fuse into a single one. There are humans like that as well. They'll have a line straight down their body, and they will be slightly different complexions on either side. I think there's a woman who's got like a slightly redder skin on one side than the other. It's fascinating. If you look up human chimeras, you see that sort of division where there's a single person who's got two sets of DNA. But that's not really how transgenderism works.
No, I know. Like that's why I was kind of curious.
But yeah, it is something that happens.
Once you started explaining, I realized I was wrong.
There's really cool lobster chimeras as well. They got two different colored lobsters.
That's not a chimera though. I don't believe he's talking about something.
The birds. Yeah, I haven't seen the bird male female division before.
Maybe it is chimera, and they just used a different term that I was looking at.
As far as I know, that's a single organism which has got two sets of DNA, and they tend to be split right down the middle. But I haven't like explored that in any great detail. I just know of chimeras.
And it would be hard to tell what an animal was experiencing as far as it's they don't have any concept of gender or like.
Yeah, so somebody was asking about transgender athletes. That's a hot topic at the moment. So there was a guy who's saying, what's stopping a guy from just saying he's a woman and then winning all of the sporting activities and so on? I was like, if a guy is dedicated enough to suffer through bullying and tormenting and to go through harrowing gender transformations and hormone therapy,
that's what I was going to say.
Surgery. Then fair play. If you want to live their life as a woman just to compete in sports, that's a hell of a sacrifice.
Well,
and imagine doing that without feeling like a woman. That you would end up submitting yourself to gender dysphoria. You'd have to trick every expert in the field. It's bad.
There's been one case in mixed martial arts of the Fallon Fox, who I believe she prefers to be called she. She didn't do well. Like once she transitioned, it's not like she's just this destroyer in the MMA world. She got her ass kicked by, I believe, Amanda Nunes. So like, it didn't do her any advantage.
Yeah, so the percentile of performance of athletes within their original gender matches the percentile of performance within the gender they transition to. I think Essence of Thought did a whole video on this where he just pulled out some statistics and went, look, this is how it works. If you are a top athlete as a man and you go through all this massive reassignment surgery and the years of changes it takes, you will be competing at the same level as a woman. So I don't really see a problem with it as long as they're allowed to go through this reassignment surgery, which is what they wanted in the first place. So it seems odd to hate people just because they were born in the wrong body.
Right. It seems rude to call somebody by the wrong pronouns when they tell you not to. Like even, I don't know, a guy would get pissed off over that. A straight guy would get pissed off over that if they were getting called a woman or something. A lot of the same people that have this big problem with the trans or not necessarily, but non-binary or the different.
According to trans people, trans just means you do not agree with the thing you were assigned at birth. From my understanding.
Yeah, cis is the opposite of that.
Right. Joel, do you subscribe or listen to Katie Montgomery?
No, not familiar with her.
Are you in the UK?
Yeah.
She's from the UK. She's a transgendered female, or you know what I mean.
Yeah,
And
okay.
she's in metal bands and stuff, and she's a YouTuber. I would recommend checking her out. Plus
Sure.
she's in your country, so yeah, I learned a lot from listening to her streams with other transgender females. That just listening to the struggles they have in the UK, and that there's UK rednecks just like there's United States rednecks that like to say and do offensive shit to people that are transitioning, and I don't know. It just she seems pretty cool. I'd recommend checking her out.
Yeah, I've gone and subscribed. I was thinking of Essence of Thought as well, because I think it's now she, is a YouTuber from England, so I was quite
I'm
drawn to that story.
To her. Yeah.
I think that now Ethel.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know that.
Was Peter Thurston now Ethel Thurston, as far as I recall.
I haven't watched any of their stuff for a while, but I have seen them in the past. So.
Yeah, they went off air for a while, and I think they've started re-releasing videos. There was a whole controversy between them and Rationality Rules, was it? Or,
Rationality Rules.
It bled over
ACA.
into ACA then. That was about the time Jen and Tracy had left, I think.
Yeah, well, I remember that.
Yeah. I don't know.
I didn't really get involved in any of that argument. I just follow YouTubers who are interesting.
No,
right.
The ACA had a big part in my deconversion, so I'll give them credit where credit's due. Matt Dillahunty helped me a lot, so.
Yeah, Matt does a lot of good for debates, doesn't he? And shortcutting. One thing he does really well is cutting away all the evasion and the lies, and just going straight to the core of an argument.
And he was really good at the Bible stuff. He was really good at deconstructing the Bible, and as being Baptist and brainwashed, it really helped me, So but Tracy and Jeff D were like my favorites.
Tracy, Jen, and Claire were the ones that ended up helping me the most, probably, out of all of it. Like Matt brought up, it's undeniable how he can just shut somebody down so fast and have this. But at the same time, I don't know, the well thought out philosophical arguments and using the Bible verses and things too. Tracy and Jen, both of them were very, very good with.
Yeah, they have very sharp minds, don't they?
Yeah. That was kind of. They were the ones that kind of opened my mind up, and I started to stray into just deism for a minute until I started listening to them, and they hit right on the topic that I was thinking about. And I'm like, oh shit, that doesn't make sense either.
Yeah, deism seems like atheism pretty much. If you're talking about a god that doesn't do anything, then you're basically an atheist at that point. It's indistinguishable from there being no god.
And then the nothing argument, the argument of, well, if you don't believe that, you just believe there was nothing then or whatever. And
it's a weird straw man that keeps
Tracy that said, I can't even imagine what nothing would be. How would you even know what that? There's always something. So how would you have anything to compare that off of or base that off of then?
Debating online, I always get a theist say to me, well, you believe that something came from nothing. I went, no.
Yeah.
Even Lawrence Krauss, who wrote A Universe from Nothing, still doesn't believe that, because if you read his book, he explains that he's talking about physics, not talking about the theological nothing, which is impossible. I think we're very good at tangents.
Yeah. Too good.
It's good though. It means the conversation flows organically.
Yeah.
So what
So,
was the second topic we were supposed to go on? I forget
well,
at this point.
we were already on it. I think we were into the environment contributing to mental health and how that.
Oh,
So
I was
the
going to say that environment is kind of a ambiguous term, and we could turn that to our favor and say to like take people out into the environment, to nature, can kind of deprogram some of that shit.
Well, do you think that some people who want to embrace nature take it a little bit too literally and try and
Yes.
remove technology from their lives, which I think is detrimental because if you look at the drive of human history, it's been to get as far away from nature as possible.
Yeah, that's true.
We live in
I like-
houses.
Right, but I
But
like
there
having
is
having this
research.
skill set that I can go out and live in the woods just as easily as I can live in my house.
So your military background.
It's just a carry on from my military background, I guess you would say. But I've always had an interest in being outdoors, even from a child. Like my dad always took me outside fishing and just walking through the woods, really.
I mean, there's also studies on like EMDR therapy of the eye movement desensitization rehabilitation. I think's the what that's short for, and that is like hypnosis kind of. And if you know everything can have its woo aspects that you could get into, and that's not what I'm talking about with that, but I guess it originates from these people, the war, the veterans that would go over to foreign wars and fight and come back with PTSD. They started finding this treatment successful, and it was based off of the movements around you while you're in the woods and things, being able to focus on your trauma and things, and kind of be able to let that go while focusing on other things around you.
That goes in line with if I'm patrolling through the woods. Like, look at what those guys were doing. If I'm patrolling through the woods, that's what I'm doing. I'm taking in all the sights and sounds and trying to pick an enemy out of that. Well, now you're putting them in that situation, but you're making them comfortable because there's not an enemy there. And they can just walk through the woods and take in the sights.
Yeah, and I mean, it's got like I don't want to quote it wrong, but I think it's a 70% success rate or something, 70-some% that they were saying that they had with the veterans that were.
And
so is that about altering the association of an environment with a different personal feeling?
Deprogramming that original.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I hadn't heard of that one before, but that makes logical sense. I think fear is one of those things that is really hard to remove because fear is the most primal of emotions.
And anxiety building up to that. Well, I don't even know what the line between anxiety and fear would be. Like you're presupposing the bad thing.
Yeah. So anxiety would be attention, a readiness for action that isn't necessarily warranted, and that can be quite tiring anyway. And I was just going to say about fear that basically your amygdala can shortcut your prefrontal cortex. So fear can go right past your higher brain functions and go straight to your actions.
Well, you're kind of subservient to your lizard brain at a certain point, at the fight or flight.
That's what
level.
I've been reading. Rewire Your Anxious Brain, How to Use the Neuroscience of Fear to End Anxiety, Panic, and Worry. And that's a really good book that goes into just what you're saying, Joel, about how like those high stress situations or whatever, those they can jump to the amygdala and be stored as a memory there. And it can be brought up again later on. It can be triggered and you not even know what's triggering it. A lot of fascinating stuff that we're just scraping the surface of and have been for freaking decades now. I wish we would put more money into. research.
To circle
for
back
this.
around, to a little bit ago, how we were talking about fossils. Like, I find me and my brother, we go and fossil hunt around here. There's some good spots to find fossils, and we find giant horsetail ferns that are like psychedales, like related to cycads. And just being in the creeks and listening to the water and not worrying about anything but trying to pick a rock out of a big bunch of rocks, like that kind of meditative thing has always been, well, meditative to me. And it kind of goes the same with just hiking. But I agree with what Joel was saying, that some people can take that way too seriously and get the woo aspect into it and think that nature will just heal you, and all you got to do is like soak in some sun rays, and you know what I mean. Like, people get too hippy dippy into stuff.
Yeah, and
have you heard of the paleo diet? That was a fad for a while.
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I didn't do it myself.
Of course, if you actually wanted to do some sort of paleo diet, you would have to avoid all the modified foods, or genetically modified food. So I don't know what's left, actually, once you remove all the domesticated plants and all the domesticated animals. What have you got left?
You would have to like go out into the woods and forage, and
you'd have to find something that's not altered, which is
either
rare or poisonous.
Those plants could have still been pollinated by a plant that was altered. You know, that violet or whatever could have been altered. It could have been pollinated by a violet that was altered.
Or it was like an escaped species that went wild or something. Yeah.
Yeah, hybrid.
I'm sure there are edible things that haven't been farmed in some way, but they're quite rare.
Well, we've got ramps right now over here that are like a wild onion garlic type thing. They're in season right now, and you pick them.
You can probably eat ants. I don't think ants have been domesticated yet.
Yeah, you can eat ants.
There are ant farms. I don't know.
I want to be a worm shepherd.
That's a good pun. There was a bit in Firefly where they were rounding up cattle, and the shepherd book was saying, I hope you know that shepherd is a purely figurative term. I don't know how to do this. That's a great show. Everyone should watch that show.
What was it?
Firefly.
What was the one I watched?
I think I watched that.
Farscape?
Yes, Farscape. That's another one there. I think they got a movie out of that. 4 seasons or something.
I don't know if that's the one I'm thinking of.
Farscape's a famous sci-fi. Firefly only had 1 season, and it was Joss Whedon's show.
Okay.
It ended up getting
it had the brown coats, right?
Yes, brown coats.
Yeah.
Yeah, that had some really interesting representations of religion in it.
The other one I said, that was like interdimensional like space travel, right? Where they put the particles that would interpret language into you or whatever. So they could talk to each other. I haven't watched
Farscape in I don't know how long, so I don't remember much about it.
Was that the one with the big dude that had the tattoos on his face and stuff?
That sounds familiar.
I think it is. I'm trying to figure out which one it is, but never mind. I'm just geeking out right now, so whatever.
I mean, it is relevant because a lot of mental health issues have been working their way into pop culture. So TV shows tend to contain the zeitgeist of their time, and you will see important questions that the authors are struggling with make their way into the narrative.
Oh yeah.
So religion is often referenced.
Autism's been being incorporated more into the mainstream. I think Star Trek just had an autistic character added to it not that long ago.
I thought the Vulcans were always autistic.
Non-binary. I'm not sure. Yeah.
You're a Vulcanist.
Star Trek was always a humanist show at its heart. That was the intention behind it.
Well, they had the the first on-air interracial kiss, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I
they tried
believe
to be quite progressive. That was
Yeah.
Uhura and Kirk, I think.
Yeah. Now, what's his name? Sucks now.
Who?
Kirk.
William Shatner. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
I mean, it was
implied in the
never
first
that.
syllable of his name, Shat.
He was never that great of an actor to begin with, I don't think.
Oh,
But
he was
that doesn't
terrible.
take away from the actual the series or what
I
they were
think-
doing at the time.
His cadence was captured
famously
beautifully.
terrible.
Yeah,
Epic rap battles did Captain Kirk versus
It's like-
Christopher Columbus.
the Keanu Reeves of his time.
Yeah.
Yeah, Keanu Reeves is a lovely guy.
He is.
I mean, if you were going to try and pick a messiah, he'd probably be a good one.
I work with a guy that looks like him, and I call him Rihanna Keith.
I think there was a YouTuber who had Rihanna O'Keefe as his character in, what was it, Cyberpunk.
Oh yeah.
I'm not familiar with that, but
Oh, that video game, it like pissed everyone off whenever it came
yeah,
out.
it was very unstable, very crashy. I had a crash in the first 5 minutes that destroyed the whole game, and I had to start again.
And the graphics don't look that great to begin with to be that messed up. Like I'm sure there's detail into them, but it's just I don't know. I don't like that style anyways. The artwork.
It was an
not
ambitious
good.
project. Yeah,
I don't even know what you call that.
It's something where they should have held on to it longer and been more perfectionist about it. But I like game studios that will refuse to release a game until it's ready, because that's just the sensible thing to do.
Yeah. All this, they played it up so much too, and they thought they were going to make all of this money off of it, and then it landed, and they ended up having to like pay people back for their games and all kinds of shit, and they didn't make nearly what they thought they were going to. Like they played it up so much.
Well, they got hacked, and all the source code is now out on the net, I think. Well, someone bought all of it.
Wow. So negligence all the way around on that one.
Yeah, they ruined all of the goodwill they had from The Witcher 3. But also, we're really good at tangents.
Yes, we are. What were we talking about again?
Oh, I don't remember.
That's going to be the new name of the podcast now.
Yeah, ADHD, the podcast.
The podcast
Forest
continues.
for the tangents. We need Forest for the tangents.
You just need to have a big sign on the screen at all times that tells you what your topic is.
Forest Gumption. That was going to be one of the titles here.
Yeah, so, I mean, religion and mental health, they go hand in hand in the sense... So, I know some people like to call religion a mental illness. It isn't. It just acts like a mental illness. One thing it can do is disguise genuine mental illness. So you might think that someone is just being religious when they actually have a mental illness and they look the same. I think there's a lot of disguising mental illness in religion.
We see that a lot in our true crime serial killer arena. Of like Gary Ridgway was what they call a missionary killer. Like he thought he was doing God's work by killing prostitutes. So like you run into people that they use that illness or whatever you would call it as a catalyst to make them go kill people.
I mean, Albert Fish, he thought that he was...
For Jesus.
Yeah, he thought he was making those children better by eating them. So
here's a related proposition then. Is it bad to be fundamentalist unless the fundamentalists are themselves bad? So some people say that the problem with religion isn't religion, it's fundamentalism. But if your fundamentals were positive, then fundamentalism wouldn't be an issue.
I think
aren't
people are predisposed mentally.
I mean, you're just saying
on impulses.
Yeah, but the fundamentalism thing, that's you've got I'd say if if you're just doing what that book says, I mean, isn't that basically what they're doing? They're just doing the book extra good, like
They
in their
don't know what they're
religion.
doing. They don't know what they're doing because their book is translations of translations
Yeah,
of
but we aren't.
translations.
Well, so if any Christian took the Bible literally and lived out all of the laws in it, they would be considered a criminal in every country
Right.
on earth.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but is there a case where being a fundamentalist about, say, the principles of humanism would be a bad thing?
Possibly. Offhand, I can't think of it.
Yeah, so for example, if you are a fundamentalist about using reason and rationality, if you're a fundamentalist about respecting other people, and just the general humanist principles, or say maybe the
Right.
Satanic Temple's tenets, that kind of thing. If
Could
you were
that be-
fundamentalist about that, would that be negative? So you can use fundamentalism in the sense of lacking nuance and being rigid and inflexible about rules. But if the rules themselves are not rigid rules, if the rules themselves encourage flexibility, and those are the fundamentals,
If
I feel like people blame fundamentalism when it's actually the fundamentals that are the problem, not the
No,
fundamentals.
I thought
If you were
specifically we
so-
were talking about Christian fundamentalism.
if you were so
just
fundamentalist,
fundamentalism as a principle.
Got you.
if you were so fundamentalist about humanism that you wouldn't defend yourself against another human that was attacking you, could that be detrimental to your own health?
Is that a fundamental of humanism?
I don't know.
So
I'm not a
that goes back to
I don't call myself a humanist.
well, if you go to the philosophies involved in investigations of pacifism, in an ultimate pacifism world, one psychopath could wipe the whole world out. So I don't see that kind of pacifism being espoused by any doctrine. I can't think of any ideology that would support that level of pacifism. I mean, Quakers are fairly pacifist, but I'm pretty sure if someone systematically started killing them, then they would have at least appeal to an authority like a police force or something like that. So
it was more of a I don't know, just a question to get the conversation going.
yeah, it's a good thing. It's a good thing to propose because you're trying to test the idea and see if it falls over, which is exactly how you should be acting. And it's of course one of the fundamentals of secular humanism is the concept of testing things.
This is something we didn't really get into either, but do you still consider yourself a Gnostic theist? Atheist? Sorry.
Oh, yeah, I would still call myself a Gnostic atheist. And I think the reason more people don't do that is because of the way religion has twisted the concept of being Gnostic about something. So they would say that knowledge is 100% certainty, but anyone who studied epistemology knows that 100% certainty is something you would almost never achieve, except for perhaps your own existence, the existence of reality. Everything else is going to be not quite 100%, because if you hit 100% certainty on anything, in say Bayesian terms, that means you are never going to change your mind, no matter how much evidence is presented proving you wrong. So to me, knowledge isn't 100% certainty. Knowledge is merely demonstrable. You can prove it.
Yeah. That's like how one of our family members is like, they will not admit that they could be wrong about their claims. Like because they deep down they know if they admit they could be wrong, then the God isn't as powerful as they claim it is, and so on and so on.
Well, if you can get the principle engaged on other things, so if you can show that they can be wrong about some trivial claim, like predicting the weather or something, then you can extend that on. Okay, so you're not infallible about this, so about all your other beliefs, and you can do it systematically and go, okay, you were wrong about this, wrong about this, wrong about this, wrong about this, and you can build up to that point as well. Okay, is it possible that since you were mistaken in all these other areas, this one little extra one as well could show you to be wrong?
I've gotten her to admit that she could be wrong about other things, but that particular God claim, she swears that she heard the voice of God and refuses to think that could be mental because it was right before a surgery, and I told her that that's a great deal of stress on your mind, and that could make you hallucinate, or
Yeah, there's a whole raft of different things it could be. False memory is probably the most common.
Right. I was trying to gently introduce those options as options, and she wasn't having it.
Yeah, so you can. A lot of people will think that you're denying their experience, and you would say, "I'm not denying, your experience because I validate your experience."
Okay, here's one too. What differences are there between a narcissist and the God of the Bible? Like, doesn't that almost fit the description of the DSM-5 for narcissism, that they can't even admit when they're wrong? They can't,
Well,
the God of the Bible is wrong a few times, but
I mean, the Bible's wrong about a bunch of shit.
And even as the God of the Bible changes his mind, asks for advice, and if you go back to the Old Testament stuff, because the God changes in character quite a lot. So if you go back to the earliest forms of Yahweh, he doesn't know things. He has to ask questions. He changes his mind.
There's double binds even to say that
Noah's flood, or the Great Flood, was him messing up. He created his perfect creation and then had to kill it all.
And the rainbow is a symbol of his regret.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The golden calf, that's one too that kind of amazes me, that was all about symbolism, right? And yet what do Christians wear around their necks all the time now? A symbol of their God in their own way.
My favorite thing about the golden calf is Moses gets the commandment not to kill.
Yeah.
Kills 3,000 people immediately. And the guy leading it, Aaron, Moses' brother, doesn't get killed. He's the one who started it.
Well, isn't he coming down the mountain with the tablets and stuff that tells them not to have idols or anything? And they built one, and he gets pissed off. You got the fucking tablets in your hand, man. Like,
one of 3 sets of tablets. Yeah. There's multiple.
Yeah, we broke them twice and had to get Jesus to hand chisel these fuckers out again.
Maybe not Jesus at that point, but yeah.
No, it would have been Yahweh.
Yeah, most Christians don't know the commandment about boiling goats.
Boiling goats?
Boiling goats in the milk
if you look at the actual...
mother.
Sounds like a metal band.
If you look at the Bible for the terms the 10 Commandments, that only appears once in the Bible. It only appears once in the commandment lists, and that's in Exodus 34. So that is the 10 Commandments. Most of them would go for the ones in, I think, Exodus 20. But if you look at the ones called the 10 Commandments, that's Exodus 34. And one of the commandments is you shouldn't boil a baby goat in its mother's milk, because that is more important than, say, outlawing pedophilia or rape.
Yeah.
Or genocide.
I was thinking, about breading chicken. You are taking a mother and basting her in her embryos of her children, and then sticking bread to her. You're tar and feathering her.
I think the Bible was silent on the plight of chickens.
Well,
it's very up on killing birds, though, to cure leprosy.
I'm telling you right now, until it speaks up for the plight of chickens, I'm not in. I'm out.
It mentions ham.
It's all about cloven hooves, but it doesn't give a fuck about the winged.
Ah, yes, the curse of ham.
What was that?
It's having shitty sideburns and pockmarks. That's the curse of ham. That's the curse of tin ham, anyway.
One thing I do see done sometimes by atheists is quoting Leviticus and trying to use Levitical laws on Christians. But I think the context of Leviticus was specifically the tribe of Levi, who was supposed to be the priesthood. So I tend to take the majority of Leviticus as only applying to the priests and not to all Jews. Of course, now all Christians, because Christians try to steal all the Jewish stuff. There's certain nuance there.
They like to pick and choose the Old and New Testament a lot. To where if you bring up something in Leviticus, they would just be like, "Oh, well, that's the Old Testament," and they try.
Yeah, so they're saying God was wrong.
Well, they try to act like Jesus didn't come and say that he wasn't going to change was it a jot or a tittle, and he was
Matthew 5:17-18. Yeah,
he was here to bring the sword. He was here to bring the sword. He wasn't here to comply with whatever. Like, he was here to enforce the law. But they try to make him sound like he was a hippie. And
there's different Jesuses, of course. It's one thing you can do is conflate all of the different Jesuses into one. I mean, there's at least 5, if not more.
Well, in America, we have
one that flipped over the table with a whip.
In America, we have young Ted Nugent, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus.
Well, so I was thinking of Paul's Jesus, and then each of the 4 Gospels has got their own Jesus. So there's 5 Jesuses straight away, but then you've got the pseudo-Paulines, like that version of Jesus. You've got the one in James. You've got all these different versions of Jesus showing up, even the one in Hebrews.
I guarantee you 90% of Christian Americans thinks Jesus was white-skinned.
Yeah, I find it hard to believe that, but apparently that's quite a common belief.
They do not like the brown-skinned folks.
Yeah, that's true. Jesus is always from wherever you're from.
Well, and then like if you get like
that's
if you go to Scientology, like their God had a fucking driver's license. L. Ron Hubbard had a driver's license. You know,
my favorite thing about Scientology, though, is that it makes more sense than Christianity, because at least aliens are possible and spaceships are possible.
And they
Which isn't that ironic too? That I mean, isn't that one of the theories now? Richard Carrier has been for a while that the spaceman thing isn't that.
Oh,
I got to watch
Jesus
some
from
of
outer
that.
Space.
Yeah.
So it's more to do with the context. So it's not talking about like Jesus being an alien in the modern sci-fi sense.
Right.
It's to do with the context of original Judaism, where they knew about outer space, they knew about planets. So in Judaism, the world was flat because they hadn't quite caught up. But in the rest of the culture, like Greek culture, they understood that the world was a sphere and it was in space, and they believed in the ether and things like that. So when we use the word heaven to translate the cosmological concepts of the Bible, we're sort of importing the modern concept of heaven, which tends to be a different dimension. But a more accurate representation would be outer space, because they believed you could literally fly up into the air and go there. It wasn't like a different dimension in the way we use the word heaven now. So Carrier is correct in that outer space is a more accurate translation.
Yeah, he said he kept mentioning about under the moon was where they were talking about, rather than
yeah, like the lowest level of the celestial sphere above the firmament.
Yeah.
It's just understanding the concept that there were multiple layers of the heavens. There was the highest heaven where God lived, and then on various lower stages of heavens, you had facsimiles of things on earth. So, like, you'd have soil and trees and living beings. The concept of as above, so below is something that goes around in Christianity, and it has its basis in Platonic philosophy, where you have like ideal versions of things, and then everything on earth is just a copy of those ideal things. And it's one of the reasons that evolution was resisted, because everyone thought that like a rabbit had a pure, perfect rabbit original copy, and all the other rabbits are copies of that. And evolution upended that, and they went, no, there isn't really such a thing as a single rabbit. They're all genetically diverse. They evolve in different ways. They have children who aren't identical to them. And that flew in the face of this Platonic philosophy. And if you go to, if you want to understand the context, probably Philo of Alexandria would be a good starting point in terms of, he comes up with a very similar character to Jesus, the Logos, the firstborn son of God, the agent of God's creation, all that stuff. And of course, he had the same cosmology in the sense that it was based on Judaism mixed with Hellenistic ideas, mixed with, like Platonic philosophy. So they had this multiple stages of the heavens. So yeah, in that sense, you could say Jesus was a space alien, but I don't like using that term in exactly that way, because you're mixing modern concepts with ancient concepts and taking things out of context. Sorry, I talked too long about that.
No, you're good. Right. I mean, I was going to say, if a guy with the name Dick Carrier or Dick Dawkins, which sounds like a porno name, if they can talk about it, you surely have a seat at the table on this. So
I read their books. So I'm just copying what they say.
no, I know. I'm just making fun a little bit. Go ahead.
Oh, I forget what I was going to say.
So we were talking about Scientology, and then we got sidetracked onto ancient Jewish cosmology.
That's how that
It
works.
was on the ancient Jewish cosmology, but I forget what it was that I was going to
There's
say.
a lot of depth and background to go into on that, and it can take quite a while to rewire your mind to the way that they used to think, because this was a time when if you claim to have visions and hallucinations, then that could be a positive thing. Like people might actually listen to you because they thought you were communing with the gods. Whereas in modern day times,
Revelation was, right?
Yeah, like the apocalypse. So Revelation is literally apocalypse. It's visions. We now associate the word with end of the world, but it actually means just visions.
Didn't some scholars think that Revelation was like a trip on some kind of hallucinogen, like maybe accidental, but like maybe he ate some mushrooms or some bad something that had a fungus on it?
Well, so there are entheogen theories, but I don't really connect them to Christianity because there's no record, there's no reference to anything like that. Now, in a lot of other contemporary religions, they would use certain plants to get high, basically, and things like cannabis. Or,
well, they've connected.
I don't think
cannabis.
they've done that in Christianity.
They have. They at least Judaism or Christianity. They said that they'd found residue at one of the places that Jesus supposedly gave I don't know if it was the...
Yeah, I've seen the cannabis theory.
But used in that region. Hashish, like, that's where the term assassin came from, was Hashishan.
Yep.
It was like, so I know that
it's
in that
some
region,
Persian culture though, so that's although they had invaded Judea and like the Babylonian and the Persian occupations could potentially have introduced those sort of things. There's no actual reference to it in Christianity, none of their rituals. So I don't make that connection, and I don't think it's necessary.
Gotcha.
You don't even need hallucinogens because people will hallucinate given the right prompting anyway.
I was just talking about Revelations, how the wild thing, like the beast that comes out of the ocean, and he's in the cave, and there's like a door inside a window or something. I'm butchering it.
I think that has a lot more to do with the writer being secretive about who he was and what his message was. And so I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think that so the consensus is that he was referring to the return of Nero, and he was worried about Nero being reborn to sort of attack the Jews again. So Christianity at that stage, because we're talking sort of in the 90s, Christians basically still saw themselves as Jews.
Like
they weren't a separate cult.
Tripping balls in a cave. Like I just pictured him tripping balls in a cave and hallucinating that there was a window he could look through.
Would you be able to write coherent Greek if you were tripping in that way? I think there's deliberate symbolism.
Absolutely not.
If you look at the way the Bible is constructed, quite a lot of the authors are highly educated. I mean, to compose in that way, you would have to be quite highly educated.
I never thought that deep into it.
Yeah, so in order to write, and say to afford even the paper to write on, not paper, obviously, you'd be looking at parchment or something like that, or papyrus. But that was an expensive thing to do. So it's not just any old person doing that. This person has an agenda. They are intentionally trying to put their message out, especially if they got their spread wild enough to get copies. So you're not talking about like some druggie having a trip. This is someone who's trying to get a very specific message across in a coded sort of way.
Right. I wasn't saying he was a druggie. I was thinking maybe, like, have you heard of like ergot? Like how grain would get infected with hallucinogenic fungus. Like
and there's actually a relationship to haunted places. They actually have high hallucinogen, like moss.
That's more what I was going for than somebody actually intentionally doing it.
Yeah, it's something that comes up fairly often, and there are a few scholars who are proposing hallucinogens, basing or like inspiring some of the writings from Christianity. It's possible, it's plausible. I just don't think we have evidence supporting it enough.
Gotcha.
And obviously, scattered communities of Christians may well have used some things like that. But as a general rule, Judaism is quite anti mind-altering substances. They're quite careful about diet and kosher rules. And early Christianity followed that same theme for a while until you get the splinter sect of Paul. But even then, we don't see any indication that they were embracing hallucinogenic substances. It was more to do with like group mass hysteria and suggestion. Just the cultural concept of the time of encouraging people who had schizotypal tendencies. So it's something that's possible. It's plausible. I don't think it's well evidenced enough to say that it was true.
Gotcha. No, I was honestly, I was just curious of your opinion.
Yeah, and of course I'm just an amateur, so take
good.
all my opinions with a grain of salt.
I'm far below amateur. Go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say it's got at least as much credibility as the ones that take the story as real to begin with, the whole thing.
Oh, right.
But
all right.
Yeah, the Bible is worth studying just in terms of the literature and trying to reconstruct how it was all pieced together and the layers of redaction it's been through. Like, it's been rewritten and edited so much. So you can spend a lifetime studying that.
I find much more interest in that end of it than I do, considering whether it was real or not, or all, or not whether it was real or not, but getting into the actual thinking that it's a literary work to be taken seriously in any way, shape, or form, really.
Yeah, there's a lot that's positive about the Bible in terms of historical context, at least.
There's better literary works out there, I think.
Yeah, it is good that some of the Bible is quite old. So it provides an interesting window into how people used to think. And, the concept that stoning was ever a just punishment, for example, it's madness. I mean, in any moral world, someone being presented with a book that said stone someone to death would immediately throw it away and go, well, I am not going to use that.
Yeah, the whole concept, it just seems like a comedy sketch of some kind. That you've got this god that's fumbling around, that's perfect, but he's fumbling around with all of these creations that he's made that goes directly against him, and even creates his own enemy. And then
Lucifer himself. Lucifer himself was an angel before he got cast out. So why wouldn't that angel accept that God was God, right? Like, I don't know. Like, it all goes against itself.
Yeah, that's often used as an argument against the free will concept. So if you say, why doesn't God show himself to atheists? The usual apologetic from Christians is, well, if he showed himself to you, then you wouldn't have a choice anymore. And you're like, well, that's not true, because look at Satan. He literally saw God and he still had a choice. So
right.
Well, nobody has a choice to begin with. It's already been written, right?
Yeah, it's because free will itself is a ridiculous concept.
That goes to the efficacy of prayer. Like, if it's all already known and it's already played out in God's mind, then if you pray, you're asking God to change his will, right? Like, if something's happening to you and you're praying to God for it not to happen to you, God wants it to happen to you or it wouldn't be happening to you.
Yeah, you can't have free will and an omniscient creator at the same time. Those concepts are incompatible.
All right. Well, with that, we're going over an hour 30 now. You have anything you wanted to plug, Joel, or
Nothing in particular, no.
All right. On the mental health thing, I'd say look into the Narcotica podcast. Trying to think of the other ones. God, I'd hate to leave anybody out, but Recovering from
No
Religion,
way.
yeah. Secular Therapy project, definitely check those out. I think it's seculartherapy.org and recoveringfromreligion.org as well. Pretty simple. But yeah, definitely give those a look. And Theremin Trees on YouTube is a real good one for getting into the religious aspects that go into mental illness and things. And they do really good work on narcissism and explaining that out too. So with that, we'll sign off.